Hello, welcome again to History B354, The Reformation. If you are watching this video, that means, or this lecture, because this is week one, lecture one, I'm assuming you've already watched the welcome video and have gotten started by at least looking at the syllabus, reading through the introduction to the course document, and that you're ready to go. Some of that information I'll be going over again here because this lecture, unlike all the others, um, is in many ways simply an introduction to the course and getting started and making sure that you're up to speed and ready to go. Whereas the others are more content, starting with week one, lecture two. Not that this is not content, because there's very important information here that I want you to know and that you will be expected to know. And so technically it's part of the course material, which I'll be talking more about shortly, but it's not something that's going to be on an exam, if that makes sense. So I just want to say again, welcome. And what do you do now that you've started? Well, as I mentioned in the welcome video, one of the things I would like you to do is introduce yourself. And on the PowerPoint slides for this lecture, that is the first thing, the first item on there, self-introductions. And again, this is just to say, we all are in this together. I posted my own self-introduction in my CV, which is an academic resume. And so just who you are, where you're from, what campus you're from, what year you are in school, what your major is, and why you wanted to take this course. And what you can also add what you expect or hope to get out of it. Those are just things. And you can share whatever else you want. You'll see if you read my self-introduction, I mentioned our dogs and cats. Fine. It just gives a little bit of personal flavor to it all. But again, it's not a requirement for your self-introduction, and it should not be a burden. I just want to get a sense that I can get to know who you are as I'm dealing with you, and that your classmates can as well. And it's in the discussion in the getting started module. So that's that. Now, the big issue, or the most important document, I shouldn't say big issue, but the most important document for this course is the syllabus. The syllabus, the official syllabus, is a Word document posted both in the Getting Started, Welcome and Getting Started module, and in the Course Documents module. In Canvas, you'll see a tab on the side marked Syllabus. I'm not going to go into the whole story behind all of this, but that tab is what we call an external link. And it's not the official syllabus. It does not mean that it's not accurate. It's just this official syllabus contains a lot more information that you need to know that is not on that an external syllabus with a link. Now, the reason we do it that way is because the state has begun to collect syllabi, to evaluate syllabi. And so the School of Liberal Arts has basically made a policy that we will present that external syllabus with as little information as possible, basically, because this is very much a political motivated approach. So that being said, my only reason of mentioning any of this is that the official syllabus for the course is the Word document posted in Welcome Introduction module and the course documents module, not the tab in Canvas on the side. Okay, that being said, if you've looked at that, you've seen what is required. Those are where you'll find the assignments, when things are due, what your readings are, what the lecture topics are. So that is really the basis for how to get through this course. And then the introduction to the course document is in some ways a narrative explication of the syllabus and some of my views behind it and some of my views behind the course in more detail. So again, that's I'm not going to give you a syllabus quiz. Some people, instructors, do that. I'm not going to, because that's your responsibility. I'll be saying more about that maybe later. I certainly talk about your responsibility in the introduction to the course document. So that's leave it there. So those are things you should start with. Also in the course documents, a very important document is historical argument, which I'll refer to again and again. It'd be probably good to look at it to begin with. Certainly, coming up to midterm 1, you should really be maybe reread it for midterm 1, for midterm 2, and then as you're preparing your final. But I'll be addressing all those things later as well. So that's kind of what to do in terms of an online course and getting started. I will be sending when I publish this course, I will also publish it with an announcement telling you that first thing to do is to watch the welcome video. And about the welcome video and all this, if you're watching this, you're already made it past this first hurdle, because when you click on the video, you get a blank screen or a gray screen, and then there's another either bar on the top or a little message saying that open this in a different window. You have to click on that, and then the video will open. Okay. Anyway, so if you're watching this, you already know that or have figured that out. In any case, that is kind of the essence of getting started. And what is in the course documents, I'm just checking here, is also the readings for the course. For this course, you only have to purchase one book. That's the Lindbergh textbook. Everything else is posted for you online, or not online, but in Canvas. And I'll be saying more about that shortly as we get going in terms of the structure of the course. But before I address some of those details, I want to say, okay, a summer course is a different beast than a regular course. Some students I know think summer courses, that means it's going to be easier. It's only 6 weeks, not as much work. And on one level, that is true. On another level, it's far more difficult, a summer course is, than a course during the regular semester, because we try to squeeze in 15 weeks of teaching into 6 weeks. That is impossible, but that is the idea behind it. So it is much more intensive, much more time demanding, because you still have to get through the whole thing. The expectations and the goals are not different. So this is not History B354 light. This is B354 as I teach it all the time. Not all the time, but whenever it's taught, I'm usually teaching it. Put into a summer format. The same thing with online courses. Students often think of online courses as being, oh, well, that's going to be easier. I'll take it online. Online courses require more discipline and taking even more responsibility for yourselves than do in-person courses. So here you are faced with a summer course, which is 100% online, asynchronous, and the asynchronous means we will never meet all together online or in person. So there's no syncing. I'm not really sure why we do things like this, but we have courses that are sometimes offered in a hybrid format where there's partly online, partly in person, and so that's not asynchronous. But a 100% online asynchronous course is we never meet all together, which some maybe has its advantages. It also has its negatives, and so we need to try to address those. And the most important part to address that is to recognize what it is that we're dealing with, and for you as the students, because 6 weeks goes by very quickly, and there is a lot of work and a lot of reading. So keep that in mind and plan accordingly. The readings and the lectures comprise the course material. Now, there are 2 types of readings. There's the textbook, or I should say textbooks almost, but I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's the lectures. Readings, textbook, and then the source documents. I'll be saying a lot more about that shortly, about the source documents, because these are the actual sources in translation, but sources that provide the basis for you to make historical arguments in your midterms and final. Now, with the textbook, as I said, you need to acquire that one way or the other. And if it's, I forget, I think it's third edition or second edition or fourth edition, I'm not sure what it is. In some ways, that's not that big of a deal. You don't have to get the latest edition. And I forget if I've even submitted this to the bookstore, because the bookstore will only order the latest edition, which means what? The most expensive. You can find it on Amazon, and I believe I gave a link in the syllabus. Finding it, I'm sure you can find it at Barnes & Noble online and many other online booksellers. The difference with the different editions, and this is not a slam on Lindbergh, but is probably mostly formatting and page numbers. That's why I believe I don't assign the syllabus. Let me just check here, because I do have the syllabus available here. No, I don't assign page numbers in Lindbergh. I just assign chapters, and I believe the chapters are more or less the same. And if there's not, if you have a question, if you have let's say a first edition that you got for $3.95 online, and if you're saying, why are we reading these chapters? Just confer with me. I'm not going to say, no, you have to buy yet another one, okay? But make it easier on all of us just to try to get the second edition, which I think is what I've assigned. Now, there's also the Myth of the West. The Myth of the West is a Word document posted, available to you in Canvas in the module of week 1 for the reading. I believe the reading for this week in The Myth of the West is chapters 4 through 10. Now, The Myth of the West is a textbook that I'm working on. It's a draft of a Western civilization textbook or an essay on Western civilization. I'm still not quite sure what to do with it yet. I've assigned it in my Western civilization courses, and the students have reacted very positively towards it. And it's there because of background. There are no prerequisites for this course, the Reformation. And you'll see on the next lecture, week 1, lecture 2, on medieval Christendom or something like that, or just basic structures of Christendom, I go into some of the background. But far more is needed. That's also why there is a foundational terms exam, but I'll address that shortly. That's the end of this first week, based on the readings in the Myth of the West and the lectures. So, to understand, because this is the time, to understand really what changes, because Reformation, as I'll be saying a lot more about this shortly, and certainly throughout this course, is a period of change. Europe in 1300 is very different than Europe in 1600. And the question is, how do we get from point A to point B, and what brings about that change? What brought about that change? What affected that? What was necessary for that change in European society, culture, politics, intellectual world? Those are the questions we have to ask. But if we don't know what came before 1300, it'll be difficult to see, oh, now that is new. And one of the problems with the Reformation, historiographically, which I'll talk more about historiography at some point, I'm sure, about how scholars have dealt with it, is assumed a lot of things were new when they weren't. Just for one example, with Martin Luther, his stance at the Diet of Worms in 1521, when he's being brought up before the emperor and the imperial legislature, saying supposedly, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me, amen." "Here I stand" is apocryphal, it's a later addition to the statement, but also he appealed to his conscience. He says, "This would be a sin to go against my conscience." That's often been seen as Luther standing up for the individual and blah, 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 blah. That is ridiculous. That is simply traditional medieval moral theology. And I think I'll be addressing that in one of the lectures. So Luther's not doing anything new by saying, I can't go against my conscience, and he does say I can do no other, here, but he doesn't say here I stand. God help me, amen. But even that "Here I Stand," which kind of does get at something that Luther was doing there, at least the existential side of things. He wasn't being modern, he was being very medieval. So it's things like that that we need to be able to see in context in order to determine what is new and what is not new with the Reformation. And with Luther, uh, there's all kinds of things, and I'm not sure. I'll have to look again to see if I have posted. I have an article that I'm not sure. I wrote it a couple years ago, but I don't think the book has come out yet. It's called Luther Today, and I wrote the first chapter on the medieval Luther, in which I go through like 7 different aspects where Luther was not new, and then a couple that where he was new, and how so. And one example is his comment about justification sola fide, by faith alone, as such, is not new. What he did with it was, but we'll get there when we get there, so to speak. So it's an issue of understanding the historical context and development. Because Luther especially, I'm not sure what the right term today is anymore, criticized the past and how he's doing something that no one, the entire medieval world basically was stupid and didn't understand, and I'm rediscovering the gospel. That is his rhetoric that he is claiming as the reality, which certainly was not the reality. But again, we'll get into all of those things. So that's another reason why some of this background is needed. Now, if you've had a Western civilization course, you can just kind of breeze through chapters 4 through 10 in the Myth of the West as a refresher, and I'll be talking about, again, the basic structures of Christendom, week 1, lecture 2, and we can go from there. But that's why that's there. Now, when we turn to the supplemental instruction, which is the next one, before we get to I'm checking on the PowerPoint slides here, following, that too can be a huge help. I'm not going to go into the whole history behind this, but Lucy Fogel is my co-instructor here, and she does a great job. She's been doing this for me for this course a couple of years anyway. Several years anyway. But the whole point is she runs her own kind of program called supplemental instruction, and you will see modules on that. She will have meetings, and some of those may be where people can all join at the same time, because she's not going to be meeting with everybody individually. So in that sense, she usually is very good about trying to find a time where everybody theoretically could meet, and she's also open to meet with people individually, as am I. But that program is very helpful for students. I know I taught this course with Lucy's help this past spring semester, and the 2 people who did the best in the course, who got the highest scores in the course, praised Lucy and the supplemental instruction as the means by which they were able to succeed to the extent that they did. Now, I just say that to advertise, but also to encourage you to use what's available to you and to make the most of it. So that's the supplemental instruction. And Lucy will be introducing herself as well and all those good things. She can say more if you can also just email her and say, what's all this about? But I just want to bring that to your attention. I mean, there are structures here to help you with this course, even as I stress your performance in this course is your own responsibility. I mean, it's your responsibility to attend the supplemental instruction. It's your responsibility to listen to the lectures, and to take notes, and to pay attention, and to do the readings. These things are not optional if you want to do well in the course, because the grading is based on the course material, which is what? The textbook, the assigned readings, and the lectures. So you can't say, okay, Reformation, I know a lot about it anyway. I'm just going to not do anything, and I'll just Google some things. If I come up with a term that I don't understand, I'll just Google it, and that will be that. That will not make it, believe me. Or the other thing is, I'll just put the midterm prompts and the final prompts into, ChatGPT or Copilot, and let AI do it for me. That will not work. And if you look at the syllabus, there's a very clearly stated AI policy, which is do not use AI for anything. I'm not going to go into this debate. For the last couple of years, I've been on the School of Liberal Arts Academic Affairs Committee, and we deal with academic misconduct, among other things, but that's one of the things we deal with, and students using AI. AI is almost an oxymoron because AI is not intelligent. It puts things together. It can do things much faster. I mean, a computer is not intelligent. A calculator is not intelligent, but can do things much faster than we can as individual human beings in our brains. But our brains still are needed. I'm not going to go in, that's not the whole point here. The whole point here is for this is number one, AI doesn't think. It pulls things together. Find things that's on the web. Boop, 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 there you go. It makes it sound very good. On the surface, superficially, an AI written paper sounds very good. It's like there's no grammatical mistakes, there's no spelling mistakes. It looks very good. It can't deal with the specific course material. And what is not online is not available to it. And Canvas is not online. I mean, it is online, but it's not publicly online. It's our own domain. So AI won't pick up what's on Canvas. And Copilot, I don't think it would, or it might, but it's not a substitute for actually doing the reading itself because it doesn't do it. It does not read. It just puts things together. And it makes up references. It makes up footnotes. I had a student turn a paper in for this course in a semester or two ago, a couple of semesters ago, I think it was, citing an article of mine. It's very plausible. I think it was like, see the article by, Eric Sock on, piety and devotion in late medieval Germany, which is, I do work on piety and devotion in late medieval Germany. I never wrote that article. That article does not exist. And you may have seen, lawyers, and now I saw an article on the web about even doctors or biologists and scientists. It makes up references and they don't catch it. So don't use it because there's no excuse. It's a zero toleration policy. And the use of AI is very easy to detect. So don't. That's all I'm going to say about it from here on out. Okay? Just don't use it. I'd rather that there were misspellings and poor grammar in your exams than that was perfect, but using AI. But, that's another issue. So, that being said, the course materials basis for your grades. What are the assignments? I've already referred to all of them, I think, meaning the first foundational terms exam, 2 midterms, and the final exam. All written, all to be submitted in Canvas online. The due dates are hard, firm deadlines. So the foundational terms exam is due the end of this week, Friday, the end of this week at 11:59 p.m. Or maybe it's Monday at 11:59. It probably is Monday at 11:59 p.m. And so if you miss it by 2 minutes or by 1 minute, it's a zero. It's a non-submission. The same with the midterms and the final. So you need to be sure that you're on top of your schedule and your assignments and when they are due and get them in. I would much rather read a half-done midterm that's submitted, as the stipulations and rules say, on time and deal with that problem than having someone email me saying, "Oh, Professor Sack, I'm sorry, I forgot about the deadline. Can I turn it in?" That upsets me. Because on the one hand, I understand it very well. On the other hand, it's like, but what did I say? listen to what I say, just follow the directions. Following the directions, whether you agree with them or not. You can say these are just stupid directions. Fine, they may be. Don't tell me that. You can tell Lucy that, but don't tell me that. Directly, you can ask me why I made those rules and regulations, but don't say they're all stupid. Why do I say that? Because I don't think they are, number one. Number two, if I did think they were stupid, I wouldn't be saying that these are the rules for the course. Number three, it's never a good idea to upset the instructor who's giving you a grade, just for practical purposes. I mean, you could think, I said this because in the back of my head, I shouldn't be saying this, but one time, a number of years ago, actually, it doesn't seem to me that long ago, but probably like in 2008 or something, a student in my Western Civilization class, I was kind of complaining to the class for how poorly they did on a quiz, and I couldn't understand why, because over half the class missed a multiple choice question of who was a founder of Islam who died in 632 CE, and this is after 9/11. So it'd be like people should know that was Muhammad. I don't care. I didn't say what was Muhammad's mother's maiden name, and I'm saying I just don't understand this to the class. I'd given them a list of terms to know, as you'll see a list of terms to know for you too, and they didn't study them. And this one kid, we had a great conversation about it afterwards, but he said, "You're being an asshole." Right there in class. And I stopped. I was like, "What? What?" I wasn't shocked at all that he thought that. I was shocked that he said it in class out loud to my face. And I said, "Why?" He goes, "You're not teaching us." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Did you do the list of terms to know and make flashcards?" "No." "Did you do the readings?" "No." "Have you missed classes and lectures?" "Yes." "How am I not teaching you?" That's the issue. Again, we met in my office. We had a great talk. And I told him, I said, "Look, you can think whatever you want about me. That's fine." I had professors I thought were complete assholes. I did. I didn't tell them that. You learn to get through it. You may have a boss who's an asshole. How do you deal with it? You don't tell them to their face, right? So all that is to say, don't do that directly to me, but you can talk to Lucy about it. You can talk to me about problems. I'm not saying don't have any complaints. You can complain. You can complain to me about the workload, about the difficulty. You can ask, for help trying to get through it. All those things, I am more than happy to try to help the best I can. That's what I'm here for. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, just ask, or again, ask Lucy, because she knows me pretty well, knows my approach to the course pretty well, and that's part of the niceness of having her here. Is if I say things that seem to be off the wall, like, what is he getting at? What the hell is he talking about? She can explain it. Okay, so if you don't want to ask me, you can ask Lucy in any case, and you can tell Lucy you think I'm an asshole. That's fine. Anyway, blah blah blah, and Lucy won't tell me. I promise. Well, she never has anyway. But so that's not an issue of grading. Anyway, point is, be responsible for your own learning. And following the deadlines and meeting the deadlines is part of that. If you have a job, professional job, and your boss gives you a project to work on, it says it's due here. If you don't get it in by that date, there's a problem. Either you're going to have to do a lot of explaining, and probably beforehand, before the due date, of why you're not going to make the due date, but you can't just miss the due date. Now, if any of you have a real emergency, you're in an automobile accident and you're in the hospital, If you're in an automobile accident and you're in the hospital, probably the last thing you're going to be thinking about is I should email Professor Sack to let him know. I understand that. But any type of real emergency, let me know and we can work with that. Okay. Or if it, I'm have pneumonia or something, I'm violently ill and I'm throwing up and I've been throwing up for the last 2 days nonstop. Let me know when you start throwing up, if that makes sense. And we can work with that. So these hard deadlines are hard and fast deadlines, but I'm not overly rigorous about it, if that makes sense. I know, and I say that too because another story, I don't know who this was, but know from a very good, reliable source. There are professors, anyway, who refuse to give any leeway, even for hospital visits. They said, no, it's not an excuse. I don't follow that, okay? I want you to do well. I'm not trying to, catch you out and mess you up. I want you to do well. I want you to learn the material. I'm very excited about the material. I like the material. This is my area of research. I want to share it. I'm not trying to test your ability to follow rules or to follow the directions. Maybe making it analogous to a speeding ticket. If I were a police officer patrolling, and if the speed limit was 35 and I saw someone going 40, I'm not going to pull them over. If I see them going 45 or more, maybe I will. Because the issue is it really worth it? Because technically, if I caught you going 36 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone, I could pull you over and give you a ticket for 1 mile too fast. I don't take that approach. That's my point. But don't mess around. Don't dare me. Don't see how fast you can drive over the speed limit before you get pulled over, if that makes sense. Do your best. Make an honest effort. If there's problems, let me know. We can work with it. Okay? That's kind of the principle of how we do things here. So, that being said, that was a long, I know, way of getting around to finally talking about the actual assignments. The first one that you face, as I mentioned, is the foundational terms exam due at the end of this week. And let me just check just to be sure. You can see this is why you need the syllabus. It's due Monday. The foundational terms exam is due Monday on July 13th by 11:59 p.m. There we go. Is a list of terms. There's a rubric there that you need to follow. And I think I state in the guide or the introduction to the course or somewhere, what you need to do actually is download that rubric. It's not the same as the guide to writing the foundational terms exam. That's there. You should read that right away. That should be the first thing you do when you're finished with this lecture is read the guide to writing the foundational terms exam. And I think there I say what you need to do is download the rubric, save it, fill it out, and then upload it and submit it in Canvas. It's very basic, okay? A list of 20 terms. Most of them are broad. Christianity and Christendom, I think, is one. Maybe even Christianity slash Christendom. But these are important terms and concepts to understand. I'll be talking about Christendom a lot in the next lecture. But Christianity, let's say, is a world religion. It's a faith. I mean, the Middle Ages, medieval scholars said it's not a religion. Christianity is not a religion. It's a faith. But that's almost gets into a technical term. But the point being is, I've had students ask me, okay, in the Middle Ages, Europe was Catholic. When did it become Christian? I'm almost taken aback. The term Catholic simply means universal. So that's basically all it means. And it's only in the course of this course, so to speak, in the 16th century, with all the divisions and the breaking up of Christendom, that we can start talking about Roman Catholicism as a distinct denomination, for lack of a better word at this time. Okay? So Christianity and Catholicism throughout this course until towards the end of it is synonymous, one and the same. As you'll see if you read the guide to writing the terms, these are not extensive definitions. Terms, and the list of terms are like vocabulary words. And in some ways, a lot of this course is learning vocabulary words, learning the vocabulary of the Reformation. What do things refer to? What do they mean? And some of those things are going to be very different than what you think they mean or what you've learned that they meant before. And I'll be talking about this next lecture too. Maybe it's even coming up. I think it's maybe coming up in this lecture. The distinction between theology and history. Yeah, it is in this lecture. Because history is not about truth in an absolute sense. But I'll get there. Yep, that's coming up, I think, in the next slide. Is it? I'm just checking here. Yes, it's coming up in the next slide. So there we go. It has to be based on the course material, and that's your grading. So if you don't know the definitions as given in the course material, you're not going to do well. The foundational terms exam is not for the whole course, it's for especially this first part. And it is designed to say, okay, do students have, let's say, the minimum understanding of what has come before? We start really with the Reformation in order to understand what's going to be coming in the historical change that happens. I believe for midterms 1 and 2, I give a list of terms to know, but there's not a list of terms to know exam. Now, one of the things you need to do on that foundational terms to know or foundational terms exam is to document where you are getting your definition. Is it from the lectures? If so, you have two options. Week 1, lecture 1, or week 1, lecture 2. Or from the readings. And there's a little bit more because there are 2 readings for this week. One is, again, the Myth of the West, chapters 4 through 10. But there, I will want you to cite it as Myth of the West, chapter 6, page, whatever the page it is on. The other is an essay, History, Myth, Religion, and Theology, or something like that. That would be the other thing you could cite. So you need to cite where you're getting information. And that should help in practice, because that's what you're going to need to do on the midterms and the final. So this is in some ways a practice exam to help prepare you for the midterms and the final, this foundational terms exam, because the skills of saying this is what I'm stating and this is where it can be found is important for the rest of the course. If you have questions about this, just let me know. Now, so that's the foundational. The midterm exams, both 1 and 2, are a single essay. Midterms 1 and 2 focus on a given source, one of the assigned primary documents. The intent, as it's stated there, is though to place that document in the broader context of what's gone on. I'll say more about this in the lecture before midterm 1 is due. It's not simply saying, because I think midterm 1 deals with the anonymous treatise, The Reformation of the Emperor Sigismund, which is great. You need to analyze that treatise and know that treatise, but also you need to talk about basically everything I've talked about in the course up until that point and how that relates to this treatise, etc. But I'll be talking again more about that as we go through. That's midterm 1 and midterm 2, and then the final is this overview. So the midterms are to help prepare for the final. The final is what it's all about, and that is whether or not the Reformation was a revolution. And with that, I am going to switch to the next penultimate slide, approaching the Reformation. This is Reform, Reformation, Revolution. That is, I've already talked about some of this before. Approaching the Reformation is difficult, too, because of the issues involved. I'm not going to go into the whole history behind the development of Reformation studies and when it all developed and how the kind of the course of the 1960s and 70s, the extraction of 16th century studies from church history. Because whatever you think about the world, about religion, about Christianity, you have to put that on the shelf for this course. Because we won't understand the developments and the transition, the changes that took place in Europe between 1300 and 1600 unless we understand the theology that was going on at the time. The historian cannot answer questions of theology. The historian can answer questions of what historical figures answered about the questions of theology. I know this is already like going to theology and history, approaching the Reformation, but it's important. This is all kind of part of the same thing on this one. It's not like point one approaching is distinct from theology and history. Because whatever the Reformation was, there are theological issues involved. If we dismiss those, we're not going to understand what was going on. If we approach it by saying, yeah, but Luther was right, or if we approach it by saying, but you know what? Yeah, okay, there are some problems in the church, but Luther was a heretic. He never should have, broken away from it. We're going to get it wrong. Or anybody else, Calvin finally got it right. Luther started things, but then Calvin actually made things right. That is a theological position. Now, as an example, which I often use, for the historian, the statement, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, died, and buried, and rose again on the third day, in accordance with the Scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father, from which he'll come again to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. The creedal statements. The historian cannot determine whether they are true or false. What the historian does is look at the impact of people who believed that they were true. And this is an important distinction to make. I'll just throw this out here too. This and not to be political here today, but even before our recent political situation, this goes back a number of years. There was conspiracy theory about the lizard people and how the lizard people were actually the rulers of the government and world. They were aliens and blah 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 blah. That's fascinating. Yes, we laugh at it. Okay, fine, but I forget the exact statistics, but it was something like 3% of the population believed it. When you think about it, okay, that's not very much. Thank God, only 3%. But you got to be kidding me, 3%. But in a country of 300 million people, 3% is 9 million people. If I'm doing my math right. 9 million people believed the lizard people were real. That blows my mind. It blew my mind then. It still blows my mind. How was that possible? That many people, even if it's only a small percentage of the population, believed that. Now, I'm not trying to equate belief in Christianity or the Christian beliefs with the belief in the lizard people, but there's something there. The historian can't just dismiss it, because what is important historically is that people believed it. And what impact did that belief have? I can talk a lot about the impact of belief and how belief is the most important historical factor, period. Not belief in any one particular thing, but belief. We'll talk about faith and reason and those things. My position is that actually reason is based on belief, but that's a whole other issue in some ways. But the approach we take here is an historical approach. Now, my point for saying all that is, as historians, we cannot appeal to absolute truth. We cannot explain what happens based on what we know that God actually did, for example. That's not the historical question. So whatever you believe, whether you believe that indeed Christianity is likened to the lizard people and that it's a big fantasy, we know that, belief in God is a ridiculous holdover from underdeveloped minds or whatever, which too is a belief, but that's gets into a whole other issue. Again, another issue. I can talk a lot about that, but I'm happy to talk. That's the other. I'm happy to talk about theological issues privately. I mean, over Zoom, obviously, because that's a separate issue than the historical aspects. So, someone might have that position that any religious belief is wacko. Someone might have the position that John Calvin evidences the truth. Someone might have the view that the Anabaptists evidence the truth, and that's just the way it is, or that Luther does, or that the Council of Trent did. It's not whether or not those claims to absolute truth are true or false that's historical. It's understanding the impact of those claims and the belief in those claims. On your exam, if you say, well, Calvin got it right, or Luther got it right, or Trent got it right, or whatever, you're not going to do very well. Because it's appealing to an absolute truth of belief. Everyone is entitled, in my view, to their own beliefs. That does not mean for me, and I could talk a lot about this, so ask, but just because everyone is entitled to their own belief does not mean for me that everybody's own belief is equally valid. You have the right to believe in the lizard people. I think you're crazy, but you have the right to be crazy, in my view. I'm not going to say you're not wrong. I'm going to say you're wrong. But this is a history course. And there are standards and principles for approaching history historically. And that is the big distinction between history and theology, because theological, I make this distinction between historical theology and history of theology. Historical theology is treating history theologically. History is treating theology historically. That is a distinction I want you to know, whether you agree with it or not. But I want you to know that because the fundamental distinction that I'm getting at here. Approaching the Reformation has so often, if not the majority of the time, been an endeavor of historical theology. I want to make it the history of theology. At least the history of theology is part of the history of the Reformation, which is part of the history of the transformation of Europe from Circa 1300 to Circa 1600. That's what this course is about. And some historians have, in this whole historiography, the tradition of history writing, have argued that, because we know, we've progressed beyond these weird superstitions of religion, and we know they're just, don't really get at anything anyway, they're all kind of kooky, we're going to dismiss them and not deal with them because they're just wacko people. My point is, we're not going to understand what was going on. We have to understand what the issue was for Luther and Zwingli about the Eucharist to understand the political aspects of it. And if we just dismiss that, we're going to not understand what was going on. So this course is not a course in the history of theology. That's not what this course is. It's the history of Europe during the period of approximately 1300 to 1600, under the title The Reformation. But the history of theology during that time is essential to understanding the development. That's what this is about and how I'm approaching this course and how I approach the Reformation. And here I have it, I see defining our terms, and that gets back in some ways to the foundational terms exam. That's why it's so important to be clear what we're talking about. and that the approach here is the history of theology, the history of Europe, 1300 to 1600, not the historical theology. Again, if you want to talk theology, I'm happy to do so, but not as part of the course. I mean, well, obviously, you're in the course, you're a student in the course. If you say, can we talk about it? I'll say, sure. That's kind of part of the course, but I hope you know what that distinction I mean. To define the terms, and the basis for your grade is how the course material, the lectures, the textbooks, and the readings, define the terms. It's not asking you, what do you think about it? It's asking how, based on this evidence, do you define the terms? Now, I know this is getting on a bit more longer than I had planned. But why is then all of this important? Yeah, the importance of the Reformation. It's not because of theological issues, even though I would claim theologically, if you do not have your history right, if you are basing your theology on bad history, you're going to have bad theology. So I would say it's important, essentially important, for any theological understanding to have a solid historical understanding first. But that's, again, this is a different debate. But in the broader scheme of things, historians, we often look at historical change. What happened to the so-called fall of Rome? We'll be talking more about that. You'll be reading about that in the Myth of the West. And I argue that Rome never fell. But that's another issue, too. But these transition periods, because we know change happens. How does it happen? Why does it happen? What brings it about? And the change in European society, the intellectual changes, the philosophical changes, the theological changes, the social changes, the political changes between 1300 and 1600 were huge. Why and how was that possible? To understand that is needed. That understanding that is needed to understand what comes thereafter. You can say, well, isn't this your argument just being a reduction? Don't we have to then understand, if we have to understand something prior to understand what comes afterwards, and we're finally getting to us and understanding ourselves, which is the point of all of this, we have to go all the way back to the Big Bang, or whatever you want to call it? In some ways, I'd say, yeah. We can't do that all the time. But the point is, we are struggling, we human beings, to understand ourselves and the world in which we find ourselves. That's just the existentialist condition. We can't study the past. The past does not exist. The only thing that exists are artifacts that signify that which no longer exists. And the Reformation is a very important development based on the extant artifacts, which includes the texts. That gets into the philosophy of history and everything else. But my point is, in the broader scheme of things, for us today, in our current situation in which we find ourselves, an understanding of the transformations of Europe between 1300 and 1600 is, I would argue, important for understanding ourselves and what's going on in our world today. Now, I'm going to leave it at that for there. You're always welcome to ask questions. And I have in this final slide, success to management, or sorry, success to management, keys to success. I was looking at time management there. There you go. There's my keys to success. And I'm just going to address the first one, engagement and involvement. The more actively you engage with the course material, the readings and the lectures, the better you'll do. Ask questions. Why does he say that? Why does Lindbergh say what he says? You know, if Lindbergh is saying this, but Sack is saying this, how do we handle that discrepancy? Who's right? Well, I am, of course. But that's another issue. In some ways, but I can address that later too. And I will before midterm 1. Um, but the more engaged you can be, the more effort you'll be able to put into the course. There's a lot of work in this course. That's why the time management is so essential, to make sure that you allow yourself enough time to give you the opportunity to do as well in this course as you can. Find your special interest. And here, the special interest can very well be your own personal beliefs, or that includes atheism. So if you're an atheist, you can say, how the hell could people believe this stuff? Why was it that, the word is was so important that people went to war over it? How could that be? That is, I think, a great question. Like the lizard people question. How can people believe that? Or if you're a convinced Catholic, look at that Catholic aspect. Or if you're convinced Lutheran aspect, or Baptist, but an Anabaptist aspect, or whatever the Calvinist aspect, you can use your own beliefs as your entry into the course to keep you engaged, while not appealing to those beliefs as your answer to the course. If that makes any sense. If it doesn't, ask. That's going to be important. But find your interest. This is not a required course. You registered for it for some reason. There must be some interest in it. What is it? What's behind that? How does that express in the course as we go along in these next 6 weeks? Utilize me. Feel free to email me. We can set up Zoom meetings. Utilize Lucy. She's a fantastic resource for you. Make use of the opportunities that are on offer for you to do as well as you can. When I've stressed, it's your responsibility. My responsibility, Lucy's responsibility, is to offer whatever help we can to enable you to perform at your best. And my responsibility, obviously, is having constructed the course. Now, that being said, kind of, I want to have challenge yourself, yes. Special interest, question everything, all those things relating particulars to the general. I'll be saying more about that with the midterms coming up. Challenge yourself without question. Dare to challenge yourself. If you come to this course with a particular religious or theological perspective or atheistic perspective, ask yourself, why? Why do I think that? Why do I believe that? It can be very uncomfortable. Education can be very uncomfortable. It can even be painful. I have 2 boys. They're grown. I remember watching them learn how to walk. I don't remember learning to walk myself. Learning to walk is a horrible experience. It hurts. You get up, you fall down. Now, babies often get up and fall down. But it hurts. It's not easy. It is damn difficult. But if we don't go through that learning process, we'd still be crawling around on the floor. All learning is difficult. So challenge yourself, open yourself up for learning, which is education. Education is being led out of educatio or educere, which is the Latin of being led out of. We're being led out of something we didn't know, our ignorance, into something we do. And everyone's ignorant. Ignorance is, there's no problem. I'm far more ignorant than I know things, than what I know. Because in the scheme of things, what I really know is really little. I do know this course material. But of so much else, I'm ignorant. be open to your ignorance and to challenge with respect to this course, to learn something new, and to have your mind expanded and changed. That's what this course is about, and we're here to help. So use what is available to you. And again, I'm glad you're here. Strap yourselves in, buckle your seatbelts, because it's going to be a wild and furious 6 weeks. And I'll see you again shortly. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.